20th of October 1714, British politics changed forever when Prince Georg Ludwig of Hanover was crowned George I, King of Great Britain and Ireland. The United Kingdom had a German monarch. With his reputation for musical brilliance, Handel, London's most fashionable German, was the natural choice when George I decided he needed some special propaganda music. The idea was to make the new foreign king literally visible to his subjects. He and his entourage would glide down the Thames in a flotilla of barges to the sound of Handel's music. Cleverly, Handel introduced hunting horns into his floating orchestra, exploiting their ability to sound bright and pure across vast distances. The water music was a triumph. The king was delighted, and Handel became a royal favourite.
He's a much grander, more politically connected figure as a musician than anyone else I can think of. His main feature, in a way, apart from his brilliance as a composer, is this incredible chameleon-like capacity to take on styles and forms and to fit in wherever he wanted to fit in.
Handel's enormous natural talent as a musician made him both prolific and versatile. But I think his restlessness and ambition drove him to experiment, constantly seeking out opportunities to explore new sounds and styles. Which is why, in the early years of George I's reign, he moved just outside London to what is now the residential suburb of Cannons Park. For the next 2 years, he lived here as house guest and resident composer to James Bridges, Duke of Chandos, and master of a huge country estate called Cannons.
From suburbia to parkland, you still see the drive.
Handel used his stay here as an opportunity to play with all sorts of new ideas, including his first English language opera, Acis and Galatea, set to words by another of Bridges' house guests, a young poet called John Gay. The palatial mansion is long gone, but a fragment of the property survives as the local parish church.
What a place.
This is the only continental Baroque parish church in the country. The Duke of Chandos, James Bridges, who rebuilt this church in 1715, he was very much a person who wanted to be extravagant and wanted people to see how much money he had, even though it was really bad money. Money which he'd made as Paymaster General to the Duke of Marlborough, working on the basis that you employ mercenaries, you invest the money, you don't pay them until they get back. And when they get back, obviously there's been natural wastage, so you can cream off the rest of the money for yourself. And he wanted to let people see him sitting in the Duke's pew there on a Sunday morning, enjoying the fashionable music of the day.
He's putting on a big show, isn't he? I mean, it's a massive display of ostentation. He's setting himself up almost like the king there.
Very, very much so. I mean, basically, all he was interested in was listening to Handel. In fact, that's why he built this place very much as an opera house. If you look, you've got the proscenium arch, you've got the stage itself, where the altar is now. The badinage would have been situated on the stage.
Church band, as it were, with the organ as the centrepiece. But it's quite unusual that you see the organ directly behind the altar. I mean, it's like music is also sacred here.
Gay and Handel's opera conjured up an innocent pastoral idyll of nymphs and shepherds, exactly the kind of enchanted world that James Bridges wanted canons to be.
The flocks shall leave the mountains, the woods the turtle dove, the nymphs forsake the fount, and I forsake my love. The flocks shall leave the mountains, the woods the turtle dove.
The music takes its cue from the sweet, simple style of the poetry, floating the words on clouds of florid Baroque phrases. But when a jealous mythological giant enters the story, Handel's able to capture all the harsh directness of the English language without breaking the spell. As exciting and sexy as it is formal and elegant, Acis in Galatea seems to me to be the German-speaking composer tackling the English language head-on and emerging joyously triumphant, much to the evident delight of his patron, James Bridges.
All of this opulence, this kitsch, you have to admire the man. I mean, he had balls, didn't he? You'd have thought, here's this nouveau riche guy. He wants to make himself just like the aristocracy. But no, he's more than that. He wants to actually better them.
He wants to better them, but equally it's also very much skin deep. The outside of the church is very, very plain. The brickwork outside is quite shoddy. I mean, this is very much scenery. This church was all about music, and he wanted to show off by employing Handel.
Handel's relationship with his patrons demonstrates his extraordinary astuteness for dealing with people who have financial control and potentially artistic control over him, but dealing with them on his own terms. Acis in Galatea allowed Handel to explore his dramatic talents at a time when it wasn't possible to perform English language opera in the London theatres.
It was typical of Handel. He'd achieved his goal, and it was time to move on.
He remained autonomous, even perhaps aloof. His brilliant talent put him in a class all of his own, and he knew it.
His first love was still Italian opera, and returning to London, he set out to prove that fashionable society simply couldn't exist without it.
London was an incredibly vigorous town, obsessed by fashion, what they called the taste of the town, and it kept changing. And it was because it was free and open and there was a lot of money.
From now on, Handel would compose and stage a big new Italian opera every year. Fearsomely expensive productions, with star salaries for the singers, big orchestras and elaborate stage effects. And to meet the enormous cost of the enterprise, he did what any enterprising 18th century businessman did. He formed a limited company and sold shares. Shares in an opulent dream world of the imagination. Handel's ability to create epic tales, peopled with recognisable human characters, like Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, meant that again and again his operas hit the bullseye as popular successes, and his artistic and commercial master plan brought him real rewards.
Handel moved into the fashionable new Mayfair district, just the sort of area where his rich and cultured opera audience lived. And he rented this modern house because as a foreigner he wasn't actually allowed to own property.
Hello. Hello, Charles. Welcome to Handel House.
Good to be here. So we're one floor up.
That's correct.
Downstairs was...
The reception area is on the ground floor. This is the first floor. And the front room here, we know from records that Handel actually rehearsed in this space. We have records of there being up to 20 people in this room at one time, which, when you consider the size of clothing they wore in those days, is quite a feat, I think. These details at the end of the stairs are one of the few original features from the house when Handel moved in.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I mean, how much of what we can see today is exactly what was here then?
The majority of it is a very faithful representation of what the house looked like. So this is Handel's bedroom, the only private space of a very public man.
And colour scheme-wise, have you sort of tried to reproduce what you perceive him to have had?
Absolutely. In fact, the colour from the walls, this grey colour, is actually copied from one piece of the original panelling that was left upstairs, where we stripped back something like 28 different coats of paint, which gave a history of the colour of the house. And the very last colour, which would have been the first one applied, was this colour. So
wow, so it's a real forensic job you had to do.
Absolutely,
actually.
absolutely.
Just how fashionable was Mayfair at the time?
It was still being built, but it was just at the point where Mayfair was beginning to become very fashionable indeed.
It was at this point that Handel seems to have decided to take the ultimate step and become a British citizen. In 1727, George I dies whilst visiting Germany, and the throne is taken by his son, George II.
One of the last acts of George I had been the naturalisation of Handel. It was partly a practical move because it gave him a greater sense of security. It allowed him opportunities as a composer that he wouldn't have had otherwise, one such opportunity being to compose the music for George II's coronation.